Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on the Discovery Fellowship Podcast. This is our Faith Life Podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Nathan, here, not with my normal co-host, Pastor Matt, but with my lovely wife, Alexis.
Hey, guys.
And we have a special guest today. This is Sam Williams. He's going to be joining us. And we'll get into you a little bit later, Sam. But as we get started today, this is episode number 41 of this podcast. If you haven't done so already, take a minute, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you downloaded this, including YouTube if you're watching the video, as well as share it with a friend. And as always, to be a part of the conversation, you can email podcast@dfchurch.com. That's right. Email podcast@dfchurch.com if you would like to have your comments, topic suggestions, whatever, just to let us know you're listening. We would love to hear from you. Now, we are going to start, as we always do, with our news segment. So, Sam, I know you're kind of new to our podcast. So one of the things that we like to do each week on the podcast is talk a little bit about some maybe current news, some things that are happening in the world around us, and how it affects maybe as a Christian. What do we think about that? How does it affect our lives? And the big news story I saw right now that was interesting to me, I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's about Hobby Lobby. Have you heard about Hobby Lobby?
Yeah, I used to work there.
You used to work there. Well, did
It's
you
true.
hear about the new boycott that people were trying to go for?
No, tell me all about it.
All right. So here's the thing. Hobby Lobby almost became the subject of the latest, boycott it from the, so lately we've had this more, conservative-led boycotts that are happening, like the Bud Light
Right.
thing, and now Target. And so now it was about to happen to Hobby Lobby. Like, people were up in arms. They were calling for the boycott. Stop Hobby Lobby.
When people say Hobby Lobby, real quick, I just want to call it the Hoblob.
The Hoblob.
That's the Hoblob. So there you go.
The Hoblob?
Yeah.
And so the reason that they were going to ban Hobby Lobby, that they wanted to stop, was because some images started circulating online of these creepy, almost satanic-looking statues being sold at Hobby Lobby. I'll show you guys the picture.
Oh, no.
If you're watching online, I'm going to put the picture up.
It's so bad.
Right here. There was these pictures that are almost looking satanic. Again, if you're watching the video,
that's
this
so
is going up
wild
right now. Now, here's the problem with this. As they started to get call for boycotting,
Hoblob. I am disappointed.
you would be, except for these aren't real.
Wait,
They
what?
were completely created by AI, and somebody had made this image, said Hobby Lobby with Satan statues, in an AI generator, and it had started spreading as if it were real.
The danger of AI, folks.
And so this is what it brings
Right.
up. So
Okay.
this is here's my question for you guys. So first of all, we had a whole episode, Alexis, you were on it, where we talked about should Christians participate in these types of socially driven boycotts.
Right.
So if you haven't listened to that one, go back, listen to that. But in spite of all that, here's what I think that's kind of interesting about this. As AI continues to create these believable, when you guys saw that, it looked at a glance, it looked reasonable, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So as these are created, are we going to see society become better about not trusting what they see online? Or is this going to create a level of hang on, I need to check that first? Or as more and more of this fake stuff keeps coming up from AI and other things, are we instead going to see just much more outrage over fake things? What do you think, Sam?
Just a gut reaction for in our cultural moment, I would assume if people don't exercise critical thinking, we're going to just see more and more outrage. It's just I can't believe that this would happen. I can't believe that this organization would let this thing happen. And then
Scandalous.
yeah, I just think of people I know that just have a hair trigger for those sort of things. They see anything that's remotely unfortunate and then just don't bother to fact check it, and then they just react. But I think the mark of someone, the mark of a Christian that is mature, is going to have more of a mindset of, well, let's see, let's look into it, let's ask these questions, and let's be quick to listen and slow to speak. That's what
exercise discernment.
Yeah, that's what I want for the future of more Christians, to behave more like that.
I think history repeats itself too. So with like the invention of the internet and social media, we did not exercise critical thinking or everything we were taught in school as far as check your sources. So maybe it's cynical, but I think this is going to go downhill really quickly.
Well, here were some of the comments. All right. So the account that posted these first, this should have been the first giveaway, AI Art Universe. But they posted this. I think we need to talk about what is going on at Hobby Lobby. Won't somebody please think of the children? And then they had posted this as a joke, right? Because this was the person who created these images. And you can see some of these right here. One comment, well, I guess even quote unquote Christian-owned companies can be bought for the right price. Severely disappointed.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, now this is crazy. Did the Christian owners sail? Or are they just in compromise and crossed the line and gone woke? That was another comment. This is absolutely insane, and a line real Christians would never cross. That was on Facebook.
Forgive my eye roll.
Here's another TikToker said, apparently, and so that's what's funny. This started, it looked like on Twitter. Then these are all comments on Facebook, on TikTok. So this thing kind of blew out over everything.
Makes sense.
Apparently, Hobby Lobby has a crap ton. They put that as one word, like crapton, of Baphomet and demon-like statues just on the shelves right now, a TikTok user said.
Straight out of Crampton.
I zoomed in on some of the price tags, though, and they do have pound symbols next to them, so it's going to be somewhere in Europe. Do we even have, Do we even have a Hobby Lobby in Europe? I haven't seen this in ours, but it's been a couple weeks since I've been there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I just worry, like you, Alexis, that as this stuff continues, because here's the thing, we're kind of at the beginning. We talk about this a lot of like what you might want to call like an AI revolution. Like AI is changing things a ton right now, and it's crazy. Mm-hmm. And we're at the very beginning. So in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, when it isn't easily distinguished, I really wonder what it's going to do. I would hope that people would learn to be it might actually push us in the right direction to say, like, I need to start actually fact checking everything. I would love to think that. The optimist side of me would love to think that. But the realistic side of me says, I think it's just going to make everything chaos.
I feel like truth will be harder to find.
Yeah.
Like it's hard right now.
Well, when they will be able to start perfectly recreating like voices, videos of famous people. I mean, they're already doing it pretty good. So when it really starts to ramp up and it's hard to tell,
well, isn't that
a lot of people will just see something and gut check believe it without actually, especially because if you see a video, you're conditioned to be like, well, at least I saw a video, I know it's true. So if we can't even trust video going forward, it's going to be interesting.
I was just going to say, isn't that a sign too of the end times, like those birth pains that are increasing, like deception?
AI. Oh.
No. Deception.
I'm pretty sure Revelation talks a lot about AI.
I've heard that on the internet.
But if you do want to know our thoughts on end of the world, end times, and eschatology in general, we did a 3-episode series on this podcast. So go back and listen to it because it's really, there was a lot to talk about and we still didn't cover everything. Well, with that note, let's move into our main topic for today. And our main topic for today is Sam. He is the main topic. So Sam, you work for YWAM, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
All right. Now, for those of you who don't know, what is YWAM?
It is a missions organization, and the main thing that YWAM does is it trains young people to go into the nations and to spread the gospel and to do all sorts of different ministries. Most of them fall under evangelism, mercy ministries, and training. And so there's lots of expressions of that, but every ministry, everything that gets started out of YWAM comes from that common ground.
And what does YWAM stands for? You want a monocle.
So close. Youth with a mission.
Youth with a mission. That's awesome. And so Sam is one of the missionaries we support here at Discovery Fellowship Church, and he is in town before heading back out in just a couple of days, right?
Yes.
And so we thought, what a great opportunity to get a little bit of information on kind of what he does. Now, because of the nature of where you're going to be going, things like that, you're not going to be able to give us a ton of specifics, correct?
Right.
All right. But we can speak in generalities, and we can kind of talk about overall what you've noticed. And so I kind of wanted to just kind of have a discussion about what it's like in some of these other countries and these non-Western places, like what it looks like spreading the gospel in a completely different cultural context, and maybe some of the successes and some of the challenges that come along with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Alexis, feel free to jump in anything you want to add or questions you come up with as we talk about this, because it's definitely fascinating.
Definitely. And it's always good when you come back. Like, I love when Sam comes back to visit. He was one of like our core youth group kids for a while there, and it's been cool to see just everything you're doing for Jesus. So, yeah.
That's awesome. So, yeah, I guess let's just start with the like, what is some of the, I don't know, you can start with the pros and the cons. Like, what are either some of the coolest things about sharing the gospel in this type of context, or what are some of the biggest challenges? Start with either one, and then we'll hit the other one after.
Yeah. Some of the really cool things that happen is you just get to see how God operates in a different cultural context. And something that I'm always encouraged by when I go on trips cross-culturally is that God just is real. And it's crazy, even for like someone who has believed as long as I have. I forget all of the time that like God is beyond, like he can't be bound by anything. And so God exists everywhere, and how he expresses himself is sometimes different in a different culture because they have different worldview, different belief systems, different ways of operating, pace of life, everything. And so it's really cool. One of my favorite things is when I meet local believers in any place, because I get to hear their story and how they interacted with God and how God really demonstrated himself to these people, and how people decided to surrender and be like, yes, from what little I know of God, I know that he's good, and I know that this is something that's worth it. And yeah, they inspire me all the time. And something I'm really passionate about is like bringing the stories of the worldwide church to like the Americans, that, because sometimes like the people that support me have a hard time believing that like what they're doing is making a difference because they're still in America doing ordinary things. But
right, we don't necessarily see it as much, the results of it.
Yeah,
we just kind of live our lives and do our thing.
Yeah, but I really like things like this where I can share more stories of like what, through prayers and donations, what people get to share in, because the kingdom of God is coming, and there's more and more people getting to hear the gospel because of what you guys do and how you guys are able to support me.
That's so really cool. So when you talk about like sharing the gospel, it's one of those things, I think, and maybe this is something you've experienced, that we almost have this tendency to be like American Christianity is equivalent of just Christianity, where it's like culturally there's a lot of stuff that we've added, and we've talked about this before. It's not always bad, right? There are going to be cultural aspects that kind of bolt onto the church because our church functions within our culture. But when you have to like break it down to the bare minimum, does it seem like what are some of the things that have stuck? What are some of those things that are like the core of the gospel that you've noticed? Or like, what are some of the things that felt like maybe before you started talking around the world to other Christians, like what were some of the things that you were almost like considered part of the church that you found out quickly, like, no, that was just an American thing. It's not really Christianity.
I am so curious to hear this.
Oh man. I'd have to really dig in, because I think this is something that when I went on my first longer term trip to Asia the first time, that's what really like God had to break down. And so I feel like I've gotten out of that way of thinking for a while.
Sure.
But I'd just say that I don't know if this is quite answering the question that you're asking, but the American church compared to like the church I've seen in the places that I've been has been more focused, just because like it has to be, because there's like the people that decide they want to follow Jesus, they lose everything else. And so like I've heard stories of believers that have lost contact with their family or their business that they used to have.
Interesting.
And so like they just have to be there for each other because there's no other way that the church is going to survive. And so that's one area that I've seen like the church worldwide like thrive under persecution. And even when things seem like there is no hope, they just understand that the life that Christ can bring is much more fulfilling, even in the face of losing so many other things.
Right. That cost.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think one of the interesting things that I would wonder when I look at that, like, and I kind of talked to you a little bit about this earlier, but I wonder about, like, you know, and again, here in America, in the Western church, we've got so many different denominations and different ways to, I don't know, we've applied the consumerist mindset that we have in America to church a lot.
Definitely.
Where it's like you go for what it gets for you, or you find the church that is like, it does all these things that I like, and so that's what I'm going to go to for now. But if they ever stop doing this thing I like, I can go to this one instead to, you know, get what I want there. I would imagine in a place where it's harder to be a Christian or where you're going to face persecution, like, I would guess that doesn't happen probably as much. Like, do they have denominations in the same way that we do? Or do they have, like, do you have your choice of churches to go to? Or do you just have, like, this is my church and this is where I go and that's where everybody who's a Christian can go?
Yeah, I'd say it's like a lot more pared down to the essentials.
Okay.
To where like there isn't much extra stuff that you talked about. Like there's not really like free coffee or smoking lights or that kind of thing. It's just a group of people that love Jesus that want to come together and worship together. And that's all you really need is people that are committed to following Jesus together. And everything else just gets figured out. Even if there is preferences, I learned pretty quickly to like, well, they don't have access to that, or not in the same way that we do here in America. And that's not important anyway, because the stuff that is important is discipleship and following Jesus together and encouraging one another and being there for each other. And that's something that like the church in Asia was really like, I came face to face with it all the time. And I had to like actually learn from them what it's like to not get caught up in like the little stuff.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I think it's really beautiful, like the worldwide church, or how his kingdom is coming, the new heaven and the new earth. But like Jesus said, the kingdom of God is now. It's like you hear these stories, and I've been on short-term mission trips where, I mean, Sam, you were there on one of them, where we met in a building that didn't have windows, and there were roosters crowing like right in the window, and service went for 3 hours, and it was pretty, it was structured, but it was still free flowing. And then, you know, you come back to like our setting, and there is like lights and an online like live stream, and much more polished, I guess, and we offer a lot. I don't know, but we're working within that context with the same goal in mind, which is to love God with everything we've got, and to love people, and to bring others into that, and to build that kingdom. So it's so cool how we're all on the same mission, but it's beautifully like diverse.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. It's like there's probably, you can kind of find pros and cons almost to everything, and it's one of those things where there's definitely things we can learn, and definitely things we should probably change, like, you know, what we focus on and how we do it. And at the same time, it's not that necessarily one expression of church is going to be better or worse than the other. They're just culturally going to have to be different because of, and I think that's one of the cool things, like biblically speaking, we don't have a ton of definition for here is what the church should look like, right? Like here's how we as Christians should live, and then here's some general rules, like when you're gathering, you know, don't talk over each other, and how we're supposed to sing a song, or there's teaching and building up, and like, there's some generalized things, but there's never like this very prescriptive, here's what your order of service looks like from Paul, right?
Well, and you have examples too from the early church, like they shared meals and clothing and everything they had. I mean, that's like anywhere, anyone in the world can do that as a part of the church. But.
Right. So then my next question was going to be like, when it comes to like music and like the music time of it, do they do like songs that they've written entirely on their own, or do they do like Western songs that have been translated, or what is it kind of look like, or how does music in general look?
Music was the first thing I asked him about too.
Yeah. I'd say the music there was just like there was more like willingness to sing louder, I guess, because I feel like everything is just in general like more intense from where I'm coming from, and probably some of my friends that I've met on these trips are going to be listening to this, but I'm just saying comparatively to like here in America where I'm from, I would say the church, like the music in Asia within church, is just much more expressive and much more like just everyone is singing together. And like the content of those songs, I'd say a good chunk of them were like Western songs that have been translated, but they're like older hymns that we would have knowledge of, because like that's what the first missionaries that went to those places would have brought with them. But I think more and more as we encourage people in the gospel and as we offer more discipleship, I want to hear more like original worship songs, like in the local languages.
That's cool.
And that's what I think God has for the future of the church is, like there was this one, we were in the country for Easter, and in one of the bigger cities, there was a gathering, like an Easter gathering, to where people could like just in the street, in a more open way, like able to gather and celebrate the resurrection of Jesus.
That's super cool.
And we saw like a cultural dance that was obviously uniquely theirs, but it was still, we all had the understanding that it was for the celebration of Jesus. Yeah. And that's what I want to see more and more in the future of the global church, is like people's distinct culture being redeemed through the life of Jesus.
I love that. I think that's a really cool idea. And it's just such a, and we've had other missionaries come in and who have shared similar things about their parts of the world. And it's so cool to think about all these different people and all these different ways of like worshiping God and loving and like, you know, following Jesus. Like we all have, like you said, Alexis, we all have the same goal, and it's going to look different wherever we are, but it's all still kind of connected in what we have in common. I think that's really cool.
I remember someone, you know, telling me that once when I was young in the faith too. It's like, because I don't know, I always loved like China growing up and then Japan. And I was like, I'm going to go overseas and that's the work that matters, right? Like if you get called somewhere else. And this wonderful Christian who put up with me at that time in my spiritual walk was like, you know what? Sometimes your hometown is your mission field, right? Yeah. Like sometimes you're called to the exact people group. And doesn't that make sense, right? Like, you know the language, you know the culture. And in a lot of ways, I feel like in this season of life and like ministry and being, you know, in an American church, it's fighting things like consumerism and preferences and elevating tradition and methods over the gospel. But you know what? For such a time as this, like he has put us here, and Sam, he's called you out and others and your friends and YWAM and our other missionaries, and each place is full of people. And it's at the end of the day, it's all about people. He wants hearts reconciled to himself. Absolutely. Over the whole world. Like, it's so cool.
To that point, what you said about like us needing each other, that's why the church is meant to be together. Like it's one body with many different functions, but it's all met with the same goal to like invite people to this life of joy and purpose that we have in Christ. We need people in America that are going to be sharing with their local culture where they're from. And we need people going out overseas to places that don't have access or don't have like the place that I went to. I think majority of the places that I've been to like don't have Christians, Bibles, or churches.
Oh, wow.
And so like for us here in America, it's pretty easy to expect that someone's going to hear the gospel because like there's churches around that can tell them, but there's a lot of places that don't have those same resources. Yeah. And so that's what I'm passionate about, like going and doing, is like giving people a chance to hear the gospel, because a lot of times we would rock up to someone's house and then we'd like share the gospel and then we'd ask, have you ever heard that before? And then they'd be like, no. And for me, coming from America, steeped in this culture, understanding the gospel from when I was a young child, to hear someone say to me, I've never heard that story before. And I know how important it is for me and for my trajectory in life, how important it is. It just does something differently to see a person that has never heard it before sitting in front of me.
We say that all the time here too. Like, this is the most important thing you'll ever hear.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest things to live out. But
I think one of the interesting things over here is increasingly I've read about, like, America is starting to be considered a post-Christian country. And so I think we do have this whole generation coming up who it's going to be like that, where they actually never have heard it, even though they grew up in a country that has been Christianized. It's like we've even started to move enough away from that you'll have people who, well, and, you know, I feel like so often we have the American church has confused what Christianity really is to a lot. I mean, I'm sure, Sam, even when you were one of our students, you probably heard me use the phrase, it's coined by somebody else, but I'm going to say it again, moral therapeutic deism, which is like this belief of, well, you can kind of try to live a good life. It's going to make you feel better. And otherwise, God is just kind of hands off and he wants you to just kind of do what you do. And if you're a good enough person, you'll still kind of go to heaven. That's what's actually kind of taught in a lot of churches here. And it's crazy. And so it's like, I think as we start to excise some of the stuff that was not really a part of the gospel, as we start to pull out parts of the church, and, you know, we've seen this whole like deconstruction movement, and that's such a big part of it, I think, is this desire to actually remove things that have crept in that didn't need to be there to begin with. So in some ways it's almost interesting because you get to go to a place where you don't have any of that. You get to just kind of start from the ground up and like, here's Jesus, let's talk about him. And that's really cool. You don't have some of the baggage that you might have to deal with here. I was going to ask you, one of the things I feel like, you know, like if you look at the letters of Paul and you look at what he was writing to the churches, there was always issues. Like, here's what you have to do about like food sacrifice to idols. That was a cultural issue for them. Or how do we contextualize, like, what do we do with the law now that Jesus is here? Like all these specific issues that were culturally relevant to them. And if I think you're talking to like the American church, you would be like, well, what are the culturally relevant issues? I think like identity is a huge one, like sexuality, like how does that fit in? You know, what does it look like to follow Jesus? Obviously our culture is very big on, it's June right now, it's Pride Month, and, you know, LGBTQ issues, or, you know, specifically trans issues are the newest one to really bubble up as like, how can the church deal with that? When you go to these churches and these other places, what would you say are like the big questions they have, or the big issues they're trying to wrestle with? Like, how do I take my new faith in Jesus, and what does that mean for this issue? Like, would there be any that kind of stand out in your mind?
Yeah. I think this, for a lot of non-Western cultures, there's a very strong concept of shame, and like the idea that the actions that I take are going to bring shame or bring like bad fortune on my family or my home culture. And something that when we were sharing the gospel with people that have never heard it, that have grown up in Asian cultures, that's something that really like resonated with them. Even if they didn't surrender to Jesus and start following him, they had a really strong respect for like how our God relates to us, because we would share the story of the Bible like start to finish, and we'd learn to do that like very quickly and just through the essentials, and that's just through a lot of practice. But something that I always felt strongly to mention is that you don't have to guess how God feels about you, because God's disposition towards you is always love at all times because of Jesus's death and resurrection. And that was something that like when we delivered that truth, it was able to like really start to transform people's hearts and minds, because shame is a strong thing. And especially for something that's baked into the culture, you have to also recognize that God is outside of space and time. He's more powerful than anything on this earth. And that's one of the things that we were constantly reminding ourselves of, because it's really easy sometimes in ministry to get discouraged when people aren't responding like you think they should to the gospel. But we would remind each other and the local Christians that we were doing this ministry with that it is important. God is bigger than everything. We have to remind ourselves of the faithfulness of God throughout what we're sharing. And that really is, like, God wants this to happen more than we do.
Right.
And so we have to trust his timing and trust, like, even us that we're learning how to share the gospel for the first time in the most clumsy way possible. Somehow it all fits into the kingdom of God, and that God truly is faithful to use everything, even sin, to be able to, like, transform people and to bring people towards himself.
Yep.
He is more powerful than anything. And that's one thing that, like, I'll be on my deathbed saying is,
like, he can do anything.
Anything.
We've been saying that a lot lately during worship. It's like, all things are possible. Like, we believe this as a church. And he can use anybody. I mean, there have been so many times in ministry. It could be missions, it could be worship, it could be teaching, in ministry in general, where it's like, myself included, it's like, this is what really spoke to me. And it's like, that really? I felt like that didn't do anything, you know? And we never know what he's going to use, right? So what is, to encourage everybody, like, a really cool success story as far as sharing the gospel? Maybe someone caught it and just kind of ran with it, or I don't know, maybe like miracles. I mean, did you experience something just kind of amazing you can encourage everybody with?
Yeah, I have lots of different stories that I could share, but I want to make sure that, like, I want to offer, like, the right one. Yeah. So let me think for just a second.
That's fine. And then another thing we can talk about too is any specific challenges and how we can be praying for you, resourcing you as you go into whatever is next. So if it's easier to answer that one first, we could jump into that too.
Yeah, I can talk about challenges real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is just, like, the human condition. This is, like, the life that we live as people, is, like, money is a part of, like, what makes ministry, like, able to happen. And so
a necessary evil.
Yeah, definitely. And something that's, like, had to shift in my mindset that, like, all of my money, all of your money, all the money that exists is God to move around as he sees fit. And so something I have to do is trust God with how he allocates that, and to not be afraid of what he asks me to do with it. And so there have been times that, like, I've been in need, and like, God has asked me to give stuff away, and that's a challenge for me to still, like, listen to that, but also
that's faith right there, like,
to trust God with how he provides for what I need. And so that's something to be praying about. But also, if you feel like you want to donate and help this ministry out in what God is doing, then I'm sure there's more details that can be put on the screen somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. We can link up a way to support Sam through YWAM and with his next adventure. So awesome. So how about spiritual challenges or a success story?
There was one time I remember in our first location, and in that location, we were kind of stumbling around, like, trying to figure stuff out. There wasn't really a set schedule. We were given, like, a time that ministry would happen, and then our contact would rock up and be like, all right, ready to go? And we'd be like, sure. And then that could mean anything from a prayer hike to, like, manual labor projects, or, like, visiting someone in their house and sharing the gospel with them. But there was one time where we went to someone's house, and they surprised us with, like, who wants to share some sort of message from the Bible or encouragement for this family or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And one of my co-leaders stepped up and shared, like, taught out of the Bible, the story of the woman that had been struggling with bleeding, and that touched the hem of Jesus's clothes, and the way that she was healed. And that was a story that my co-leader really wanted to share, because she didn't really prepare it. She had another story prepared for what she wanted to share. But then through listening to God, he prompted her to share specifically this story of the woman touching the hem of Jesus's robe, and through that she was able to like talk about shame and pray into places of pain, both physically and spiritually, for this family that we were with, and she was able to like really encourage. And then her legs had been hurting, and we were able to pray for those as well. Mm-hmm. And as she was like, as we moved from our time that we shared to like just fellowship and sharing tea together, she was walking around and she was like, wow, I feel so much better. And this is all through a translator, so it's like hard to understand sometimes, but like through her body language, she was almost running and jumping with like how excited she was to be able to like have more feeling and more pain-free feelings in her legs. And so
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I think we forget, I know I do. I was reading yesterday about when Jesus said, ask and it'll be given to you, seek and knock and you will find. And it's like, maybe we don't have because we don't ask, or we're asking with that specific answer in mind. And when we don't get it, it like somehow damages our faith. But asking for healing, asking for God to move, asking for him to do things that like blow our minds, like above and beyond things. His word says he can do immeasurably more than we can even think or imagine. Something like that is, a testament to that for sure. So, and to get to hear it and see it, that's cool. So,
well, I think as we kind of draw it to a close on this topic today, again, Sam, thanks so much for coming by and talking to us.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Much fun. And like Lexus said, there are ways that you can find out more about what Sam is doing, how you can support him as well. In fact, if you check the show notes of this episode, we'll have a link in there directly to the ways to get a little bit more information. But let's move on to one of my favorite segments. This is where we ask the AI for a list and see what it says. So this is, Sam, what I've found is always a funny or interesting experience is to go to ChatGPT. Do you know what ChatGPT is?
Yeah.
And just ask it a question and just see what it tells us. I generally have it create a list for us, like top 10 worst vacations in the Bible or something like that. And we just see what AI thinks about that. Now, remember, if you'd like to sponsor this segment and let us get on to ChatGPT 4, just email podcast@dfchurch.com. Again, for just the price of a cup of coffee a week, maybe, I don't know, for like $20, you can sponsor us to get the better version of ChatGPT. We will read one of your prompts as well as something that's like a little ad for you. So just email podcast@dfchurch.com and you can sponsor this as well. But today's list is a little weird. I was like, do I even ask it this? What's it going to say? Is this considered not cool? But at the same time, I'm wondering what it would say. And so I asked it, what are the top 10 least helpful Bible stories? Are we allowed to ask that? Are we allowed to say that any part of the Bible is least helpful? Now, here's the thing. You would immediately say, no, of course not. But in the back of your mind, I bet you're all thinking of something like, well, that didn't really speak to me. So I thought, well, what does AI say are the top 10 least helpful? Now, it does give us a little disclaimer. I don't know if AI is gendered yet, but the AI says the perception of which Bible stories are least helpful can vary depending on individual perspectives and interpretations. However, here are 10 Bible stories that some people may find challenging or less helpful in certain contexts. By giving you that caveat of may find challenging, it makes it a little bit better.
I mean, the very obvious Christian Band-Aid I want to slap over this entire thing is God's word. All of it is good for teaching and rebuke, and it's breathed by him, so all of it serves a purpose. The hard parts for me are reading through all the genealogies.
Okay.
Well, they're not unhelpful, but it's like...
Right, but so you're going to find... Right, and that's what I'm saying, is that sometimes, while we agree the Bible is the inspired, inerrant, living word of God, sometimes we can maybe struggle with certain parts of it and finding what connects with.
All right, you can get me on board with this list. I will throw in what I like to say about AI real quick, because this segment is really fun. But it's a great social experiment. It's like God made us in his image, and then by some sort of calamity, we created AI in our image, and I just laugh because it's so dumb sometimes.
It is, especially, all right, so number 10, I don't find this unhelpful, maybe challenging, but not unhelpful. Number 10, the plagues of Egypt. The depiction of God's judgment through 10 plagues on Egypt, including the death of the firstborn, can be challenging for some readers to understand or find helpful lessons within. I think we can find tons of helpful lessons within the plagues of Egypt. So this one doesn't really strike me as unhelpful. I can find a lot of application, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that one. What do you think?
I personally have never experienced a plague.
Okay.
But I think this goes back to like discipleship and the need for it is if you just like give someone a story without like setting up the proper context, they can be like, it's easy to look at the 10 plagues story and then be afraid of God because of it. Because they're just like,
Or
oh,
his
God is,
wrath.
yeah, God is scary and powerful. But
Don't make him mad.
like as you zoom out into the greater narrative of scripture, you see that the 10 plagues on Egypt were about God demonstrating his character for like his people.
Yeah.
So that because the original readers of this story were people that didn't know their identity. They were Egyptian slaves. Right. And so when you look at this story and when you read this story or hear this story as they would, you see that like each plague is coming against one of the Egyptian deities.
Right.
And then God is demonstrating his power above everything. And so I think that when you look at it like that, maybe I'm overthinking this because this is just an AI thing, but
no, but I agree.
When you have the proper context and when you have the proper view of scripture doing what it's meant to do, answering the questions that it was meant to ask, then I think that every story in the Bible can be helpful.
Dude, maybe this is the spin. Okay, so we're gonna prove why every
Each
single one of these.
All right, but
is
we don't need to
awesome.
we don't need to go super in depth for the sake of your time. Actually, unless you want us to, stick around. There's a podcast I listen to that's 4 hours every episode, so I guess whatever.
That's
all
a
right,
chunk
number
of
9.
time.
It is. I listen to it in
sacrifice
chunks.
of time.
Number 9, the story of Job. While the book of Job offers
Okay.
valuable insights into suffering and faith, some may find its prolonged dialogue and complex theological discussions less accessible or practical in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think God uses all things, and
Okay.
even when he takes things away from Job, he restores it. It's a story
He
of
gets the kids back. Well, he gets new kids back
I
that
know.
are replacements.
It's a
That would
story
be
of
maybe the part that's
restoration.
harder for people to like what?
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, number 8, Jephthah's vow. The story of Jephthah making a rash vow and subsequently sacrificing his daughter can be troubling and difficult to reconcile with ethical principles. We talked actually about this one on an earlier episode of the podcast, pretty in depth, and how, the difference between prescriptive and descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this never says, again, context matters, right? It never says that what he did was good. In fact, it's shown as an example of what not to do, kind of is the way it's presented. So
There you go.
number 7, the Battle of Jericho. Some readers may struggle with the depiction of God commanding the Israelites to destroy an entire city, including its inhabitants. That's the entire Old Testament. You have to, when you want to talk about, the way that the societies had to interact with each other. And it's kind of an interesting thing of, the people, the Canaanites, who were being conquered, were actually the ones who were actually pretty terrible to, women and children, especially sacrificing children to Molech and all that stuff. And so it's when you see that happening, a lot of people tend to ask, well, where is God? Why doesn't he do something about it? But then he does something about it. And you're like, why did you send those people to do that about it? Because that was mean. It's weird. Number 6, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story's depiction of God's judgment through the destruction of entire cities, including the fate of Lot's wife, can be challenging to reconcile with ideas of divine love and mercy. Does that strike you as an unhelpful or difficult or challenging story?
I've met lots of people that this story was taught to them in a really bad way, minus context and those sort of things.
Yep.
Okay.
And so I think that I have some friends and people that I've met during my times of evangelism. This is more specifically here in the States that I've heard these stories, but people have heard this story of Sodom and Gomorrah and then be like, well, if God is like that, I don't want anything to do with him, without understanding, again, the greater context of the narrative, and that man, I don't know if this is the right story, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Okay.
there's someone that like cries out and it's just like, will you save the city if even this many people are righteous?
Yeah.
Yep. That's the right one.
Abraham.
And so there was prayer and petition, and then it got to the point where like there's not enough righteous people in this city. I want to save this city, but there's not enough righteous people in here, and they have been unrepentant. And so this is the judgment. I have warned them about it.
Oh yeah.
And so like, again, I think when people are taught properly, then the scriptures can really come alive.
You know, you were talking earlier too, Sam, about how we when we share the gospel, we're sharing it in a way that speaks to those people and their needs, and we contextualize the gospel so that it's effective and it reaches people's hearts, right? It's the same way, I think, with the Old Testament, where so much of it is setting up the justice of God, like his holiness, not like self-righteousness, like his set apartness, where it's like our culture is crying out right now, I think, for right and wrong. Like, this is right, this is wrong. They won't call it that. There's a lot of subjectivity in there, and they don't want certain things to be called right and wrong. But it's like, yeah, that's that God. You want right and wrong. Like, he defined that. He is that. He is just. Like, context matters. I don't know. This list, though, it's rough because all of it is useful.
Right. All right. Well, number 5, the stoning of Achan from Joshua 7. You guys familiar with this story? The severity of Achan's punishment, including, the stoning of his entire family, can be distressing and raise questions about justice and proportionality. So I looked at this one real quick because I wasn't even super familiar with this one. Joshua 7, the Israelites had just gone through and like defeated this place, and this guy had like taken some plunder from the city, like silver and stuff like that, and taken it for himself and hidden it in his tent. Mm-hmm. And so when he was caught, it was like, well, you weren't supposed to do that. You weren't supposed to like be greedy and take the spoils for yourself and for your own gain. And so his whole family got killed as a punishment.
Yeah, it reminds me of the 2 in Acts who took money for the church or from the church or something. And
Ananias and Sapphira, yeah.
And lied about it.
Is that on the list?
Boom, dead.
You're going to find out.
Okay.
Number 4.
Spoiler.
The Levite and his concubine. Judges 19 through 21. So we got a couple chapters worth on here. This story contains graphic and disturbing content, including violence against women, and can be difficult to understand or find meaningful lessons within.
We always joke about this real quick, that Christian culture, little c, church, it's so weird how we're weird about like movies and ratings and stuff. The Bible is so rated R. I'm just saying, keep going.
So in this story, it's pretty intense. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there was a guy, he had a concubine. She got like attacked and then killed. And then they like, I don't know, go back and read this. Judges 19 to 21 and actually do that and tell us what you found interesting about it, or if you found it unhelpful. I do think briefly it will just say descriptive versus prescriptive, right? Telling what happened in an ancient, brutal world at times is not the same as the Bible saying this is a good thing and this is a situation we should desire.
Right.
And I think that's something that people forget so often, is that the Bible, especially in like Judges, is just recording events that happened. It's not necessarily saying these are good. All right. Number 3, the Witch of Endor. I like this story actually a lot.
This one sounds like Star Wars.
Well, because the moon of Endor is in Star Wars. This story involves King Saul consulting a medium to summon the spirit of the deceased prophet Samuel, which raises theological and ethical questions for some readers.
She's a witch.
She is. So King Saul goes to this woman, is like, summon a spirit for me. Obviously stuff we wouldn't want to do. And then the spirit, it appears. Here's the thing that's really weird about it.
There is actual dark power.
Well, no, it seems like she succeeds, though, that it's actually Samuel. So that God allows the spirit of this dead guy to be brought back for a minute. And then the woman freaks out and is like, wait, why are you telling me to do this? You're actually King Saul, or like, what's going on here? I'm not supposed to be doing this type of thing.
God can use anything, right?
It's definitely an interesting story.
Wow.
But again, not shown as a good thing to do. In fact, this is kind of the downfall of King Saul, is him doing things like this. So I find that pretty helpful.
Yeah. I'd say this is actually hugely helpful.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with cultures of like different cultures and worldviews. in my travels, I actually got to meet a lot of people that do practice witchcraft. And their question is usually, if they're not asking it directly, it's like underneath the surface.
Yeah,
is like,
subtext.
how do you get things to happen the way that you want them? And then we get to tell them about prayer and how it stands in contrast from witchcraft, and how witchcraft is relying on, this is like a blanket statement, so there's nuance here depending on who you're talking to and which culture you're a part of. But in general, witchcraft is relying on your own spiritual power, and then prayer is relying on like God, who is all powerful. And something that's important from this, and just what I think and what I've been taught, is that God wouldn't tell us not to do something if it was impossible. So I do think that witchcraft is possible, but it's not something that we as Christians need to subscribe to.
Yeah, we're commanded not to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's like God wouldn't tell us don't hover 5 feet off the ground. Like he wouldn't give that as a command because we can't do that, is what you're kind of saying.
Yeah.
So that the prohibition against it is that there is something there that we can be doing.
That's what I was saying, is dark energy, or not energy, but spirits and demons and stuff. It's all real.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And this is the question that like people, this is where I'd say like even missions has gone wrong in the past when we're coming from a Western context, is people are all the time asking questions about like, what do I do with all these spiritual beings that I see all the time? And then the Western church will be like, they don't exist. And then they're like, but they do. And so,
Yeah.
Interesting.
The Bible, I mean,
yeah.
come on.
So like, it's important to consider worldview and consider, again, it goes back to contextualizing the gospel. And this is a story that I've often brought to people that like struggle with the concept of witchcraft, or like are still like, I've even met some, well, I haven't met, but I've heard stories of people that have met Christians who are still like being discipled away from relying on witchcraft sometimes.
Oh, wow.
And so like there are some cultures that like say, yeah, I'm Christian, but then still practice witchcraft.
They kind of
Yeah.
have that syncretism.
Yeah.
Blending.
And this is a really important story to show that the importance goes, because it is a completely different system of spirituality,
Yeah.
There's
to rely on yourself versus to rely on God, which goes back to like, we really aren't that different as people
Yeah.
worldwide. We still have the tendency to rely on ourselves versus to rely on God. And it takes some practice to live as a person in the kingdom of God.
Yeah. I was just going to say there's an opportunity there too, where it's, you're not asking a random entity to do things for you. It's, there is a God. He loves you. He knows what's best for you. And you're praying for his will, knowing that his will of what's going to happen is actually good for you. Like, man, that's loaded.
Number 2, the Tower of Babel. While it carries lessons about human pride, the story's account of God confusing language can be confusing. That's funny. Or difficult to connect with for some. So far, none of these have been like super unhelpful, I have found. ChatGPT, you've not done a great job
What'd I tell
with
ya?
my prompt.
AI.
But it's because it can't understand spiritual matters yet.
Because it's not from God.
I'm just kidding. All right, so let's move on. Number 1, Alexis called it the genealogies. These extensive, in Matthew and Luke, these extensive lists of names may seem less relevant or engaging to some readers.
Huh.
What do you guys think about the genealogies? I understand their importance, but I don't ever sit and just like read them for fun.
I can share one really cool tidbit, I guess, that I took away from Bible study once that have to do with the genealogies. Learning about the deity of Jesus, going through his genealogies in both Matthew and Luke, and how from both sides he was from David's line.
Right.
Even through Joseph as like an adopted dad. He could be traced back.
Right.
That's so cool. See, that
Right.
gives
The
the
purpose
long
of
list
it
of names a
is
ton
super
of
cool.
purpose.
Yeah. But it's sometimes a little bit difficult to maybe read them.
Like Chronicles and stuff, where it's like the families, or even
when you get it, or sometimes
or the 12 tribes,
Yeah,
like
see-
listing out. There was a section that I was reading earlier this year where it was literally every name in the tribe. I'm like,
maybe numbers, because that's why they call it
Yes.
numbers. They're like, and it was this many and this
That was
tribe,
it.
and you're just like,
yep.
That's cool, but it doesn't help me necessarily, other than to see how many. And that was what I was gonna say. Is like, what would you have put on that list that wasn't there? Like any of the like Deuteronomical law, I think sometimes can be very difficult. It can be a dry section when you read through it, and it's like again, we can understand why it's there, but sometimes it's hard to digest it. Was there anything that was not on that list that when I asked that prompt that came to your mind?
Ooh, there's this story of I forget where the address of it is, but there's a story of someone. Sorry, I'm gonna get there in a second.
You're fine.
The Ark of the Covenant is being carried from one place to another.
Oh yeah,
and
they put it on a cart.
They put it on a cart, even though they're not supposed to. And then it like starts to tip, and then someone reaches out to like steady it, boom, and then they're struck down as dead.
Yep.
I had a hard time with that one for a while because I was like, this person is
he was trying to help,
simply
right?
trying to help. It seems like the heart is there.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, just a question of like, even all the stories in the Bible aren't meant to be understood all the time, 100% at face value. I think we're like the life of a disciple is supposed to wrestle with these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
Because there are hard stories in the Bible. There are things that are hard to understand, or like sometimes God behaves in a way that we wouldn't behave in, and it's really hard for us to understand why God would make a decision that he made. And
often I'm reading and thinking that.
But it's a testament to like how big God is and the mystery of his character.
Absolutely. And balancing his holiness with his mercy.
Yeah.
Like,
awesome. Well, we don't have any listener mail this week. So again, please take a minute, pull off to the side of the road if you're driving. Don't email while driving, but email us podcast@dfchurch.com. Let us know topics you would like to discuss, questions you might have, or, if you want to sponsor the AI segment. But with that, we're going to call it a day. So we will see you next week. Again, thank you, Sam.
Of course.
And thank you, Alexis.
Thanks.